Jack had seen hundreds of faces come and go through Heartland, but something about Nathan never sat right with him. Maybe it was the way the young men avoided eye contact when questions got too close, or the strange phone calls late at night when everyone else was asleep. The ranch had always been a place of trust, built on honesty and hard work, but lately, Jack could feel that trust slipping through his fingers. He wasn't sure what Nathan was hiding yet, but one thing was certain: whatever it was, it had no place at Heartland. The evening air was heavy with silence. The sun had already dipped behind the hills, and the horses were restless inside the barn. Jack stood near the paddock, his hat pulled low, eyes fixed on the faint light coming from the far end of the stables. Nathan was there again, moving quietly, almost too quietly. It wasn't the first time Jack had seen him sneaking around after dark. For weeks now, he'd noticed small things out of place: a tool missing, the feed room door left open, the fence latch undone. Nothing major on its own, but together, it felt wrong. Jack leaned against the post, his breath steady, his mind racing. He didn't want to believe Nathan was up to something bad. Amy had trusted the boy, giving him a chance to rebuild his life after everything that had happened. And Jack wanted to believe in that second chance too, but the ranch had been through enough heartbreak to know that blind trust could be dangerous. Nathan's shadow moved across the wall again. He was talking to someone on the phone, his voice low and sharp. Jack couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough to tighten the knot in his chest. It wasn't the voice of a man asking for help, it was the voice of someone making a deal. The next morning, Jack acted like nothing had happened. He drank his coffee, fixed the fence, and watched Nathan from the corner of his eye. The younger men smiled easily, cracked a few jokes with Tim, and worked hard as always. If someone didn't know better, they'd think he was just another ranch hand trying to earn his keep. But Jack knew better. He'd learned to read people, and Nathan was trying too hard to look innocent. That evening, when everyone gathered for dinner, Jack barely touched his food. His eyes kept drifting to Nathan, who sat across the table laughing with Amy. Every time their eyes met, Nathan looked away. That tiny flicker of guilt told Jack everything he needed to know: something was wrong. Something that could tear the ranch apart if he didn't find out what it was. And that night, when the lights went out, Jack made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for trouble to come knocking. He was going to find the truth no matter what it cost him. Months before the sleepless nights and whispered suspicions, Nathan had arrived at Heartland with nothing but a worn duffel bag and eyes that carried more pain than words could ever tell. He came when the snow was still thick on the ground, quiet, polite, almost too careful with his every step. As if he didn't want to leave footprints that might remind him of where he'd been. Amy had been the first to vouch for him. She'd told Jack that Nathan wanted a new start, that he was done running from his past. There was something about her voice that night, a kind of hope Jack hadn't heard in a long time. He didn't want to crush that hope, not when Heartland was built on second chances. So, against his better judgment, he gave Nathan a place to stay and a job to do. 81st. Nathan worked hard, maybe harder than anyone else on the ranch. He rose before sunrise, mucked stalls without complaint, and spoke little but smiled often. For a while, Jack thought maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the young man really was just trying to put his life back together. But trust doesn't come easy to a man who's buried too many friends and seen too many promises break. Jack had lived through loss, through lies that nearly tore his family apart. He wasn't ready to add another name to that list. One evening, Jack caught Nathan staring at Ty's old toolshed, the one no one had touched since Ty's passing. Nathan's hand brushed the handle, his face heavy with thought, like he recognized something. When Jack asked what he was doing there, Nathan simply said, "Just remembering someone I used to be." It was the kind of answer that stayed with you, too poetic, too vague, too easy to hide behind. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. Horses grew restless at night. Feed went missing. A stranger was seen near the west pasture, and Nathan was always the last one to head inside. Jack's gut twisted with that old familiar warning, the same one that used to come before everything fell apart. He wanted to believe Nathan's words, to believe that peace was all he wanted. But every time he looked into the boy's eyes, he saw a storm brewing. Still, Jack stayed quiet. Maybe it was because of Amy. Or maybe because part of him saw his younger self in Nathan, a man haunted by mistakes, trying to build something out of the pieces. But even then, Jack knew peace built on secrets never lasts. And though Heartland had seen its fair share of pain, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this time, the storm wasn't coming from outside the ranch. It was already standing right in front of him. The wind howled that night, sharp and restless, as if even nature sensed that something was about to go wrong. Heartland slept under a blanket of fog, the kind that swallowed sound and made shadows move on their own. Jack had been up late fixing the heater in the barn when he heard a sudden clang of metal, followed by the uneasy whinny of a horse. His gut tightened instantly. Horses didn't spook without reason. He set his wrench aside and stepped out into the cold. The moonlight cut across the yard like a silver blade, and there near the tack room he saw movement. A figure, tall and lean, moving with hurried purpose. Jack squinted. It was Nathan. He was carrying something, a box, maybe, and glancing around like he didn't want to be seen. For a split second, their eyes met through the dark. Nathan froze, then disappeared inside the barn. Jack followed quietly, his boots sinking into the mud. Inside, the air was tense, thick with the smell of hay and fear. He could hear Nathan talking under his breath. "Come on! Come on!" The words were rushed, desperate. Jack hid behind a stall, waiting. When Nathan turned toward the door, Jack stepped forward just far enough to see the box on the table. It wasn't ranch supplies. It was equipment, old, rusted, and covered in grease. Jack recognized the brand instantly. It belonged to the trailer shed, the one locked since last season. Before Jack could say a word, a loud crack echoed through the barn, the sound of a broken latch. Spartan, Amy's horse, kicked at the stall, startled by the noise. Nathan jumped, dropped the box, and swore under his breath. For a moment, time froze. Jack's heart hammered in his chest as he stared at the young man he'd started to trust. Nathan finally looked up, his expression a mix of guilt and exhaustion. "I can explain," he said, his voice trembling. But explanations were easy. Truth wasn't. The next morning, Jack walked the ranch with heavier steps. Amy was feeding the horses, humming softly, unaware that the piece she loved so much was starting to crack. Jack didn't tell her what he'd seen, not yet. He wanted to be sure. He spent the day quietly watching, pretending everything was fine. But his mind kept replaying that scene in the barn. The box, the fear in Nathan's eyes, the lie that was clearly hiding behind his trembling hands. Later that evening, as the sky turned gold, Tim found Jack mending the fence. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Tim joked. Jack just muttered, "Maybe I have." He didn't elaborate. He didn't have proof, only instinct. And instinct, he'd learned long ago, was both a blessing and a curse. That night, Jack made up his mind. No more watching from the sidelines. If Nathan was hiding something dangerous, Jack needed to find out what it was before Amy got hurt. The ranch had survived storms before, but this one felt different. This one wasn't just about protecting Heartland's land, it was about protecting its heart. The nights grew longer after that. Or maybe it only felt that way because Jack barely slept. Every creak of a door, every crunch of gravel outside his window pulled him awake. His instincts were louder than his thoughts now, whispering the same thing over and over: something's wrong at Heartland. He didn't need proof anymore. He needed answers. Jack began watching Nathan more carefully, though he made sure no one noticed. In the daylight, Nathan worked as if nothing had happened. He joked with Georgie, helped Amy with the horses, and shared lunch with Lou like he belonged there. But Jack saw the small tells, the twitch in his jaw when someone asked about his past, the way his hands shook when he thought no one was looking. Guilt had a rhythm, and Nathan's was steady and loud. One afternoon, Jack found fresh boot prints behind the old feed shed, heavy prints, half covered in mud, leading toward the far fence. That area hadn't been used in months. He followed the trail until it disappeared near a clump of trees where the ground was disturbed, like someone had been digging. A chill ran down his spine. He crouched down and brushed the dirt with his hand. There was something metallic buried beneath, maybe a tool, maybe something worse. But before he could find out, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. "Nathan?" Jack called, standing quickly. But no one answered. Only the wind moved through the grass. He waited, heart pounding, before stepping back. Whoever had been there was gone. That evening, Jack sat in his truck, engine off, watching the barn through the windshield. Nathan came out around midnight, carrying a small bag. He checked over his shoulder, then headed toward the same trees where Jack had been earlier. Jack followed on foot, moving quietly through the darkness. The moon was high, painting the land in cold silver light. Nathan stopped near the fence, kneeling down to pull something from the dirt. Jack stepped closer and saw it. A small black envelope sealed tight, the kind used for cash or confidential documents. Nathan tucked it into his jacket, looked around one last time, then turned back toward the barn. Jack didn't stop him that night. He just stood there, hidden in the shadows, his heart heavy with what he'd seen. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was proof. But proof of what? The next morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, Jack stared out across the fields. He'd always believed that truth had a way of showing itself at Heartland, just like dawn always chased away the dark. But this time, the darkness wasn't running, it was fighting to stay. And as Jack watched Nathan walk toward the stables with that same quiet smile, he made a promise to himself. Before another sun rose, he'd uncover everything. Whatever Nathan was hiding, it was about to come to light, and Jack Bartlett would be the one to drag it there. The air that night was heavy with tension, like the whole ranch was holding its breath. The sky was moonless black and endless, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain. Jack sat on the porch in silence, his coffee long gone cold, his eyes fixed on the barn. He'd been waiting for this moment. For nights, he'd followed the same pattern, Nathan sneaking out, disappearing into the dark, always toward the west fence. But tonight, Jack wasn't just going to watch. Tonight, he'd get his answers. When Nathan finally appeared, his movements were fast, deliberate. He carried that same black envelope tucked inside his jacket. He thought everyone was asleep, but as he passed the paddock, a low voice broke the quiet. "Where are you off to, son?" Nathan froze mid-step. The shadows shifted as Jack stepped forward, his face half lit by the porch light. His tone wasn't angry, it was colder than that. The kind of calm that came before a storm. "Just checking on something," Nathan stammered, forcing a weak smile. "At midnight?" Jack asked, eyes narrowing. "With an envelope in your coat?" Nathan hesitated, then looked away. "You wouldn't understand." Jack's boots crunched against the gravel as he moved closer. "Try me." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them felt thick enough to break. Nathan's hands trembled as he pulled out the envelope, holding it like it burned. "It's not what you think," he said, voice cracking. "I wasn't stealing. I was paying someone to leave this place alone." Jack's frown deepened. "Paying who?" Nathan's eyes darted toward the trees. "A man I used to owe. He found out I was here. Said he'd come for me or for the ranch if I didn't pay up." Jack's chest tightened. So that was it, the digging, the phone calls, the midnight walks. Not betrayal. Fear. "Why didn't you tell us?" Jack's voice softened slightly, though the hurt still lingered. "You think this ranch hasn't faced trouble before? You think we wouldn't have helped you?" Nathan shook his head. "I didn't want Amy to look at me like I was one of them again, someone broken, someone dangerous." His words came out like a confession he'd been holding back for months. For a long moment, Jack just stood there, looking at the boy who reminded him too much of a younger Ty, full of guilt, full of fight, full of mistakes he didn't know how to fix. The rain started to fall, light but steady, running down Jack's hat brim. "Next time you've got ghosts chasing you," Jack said quietly, "don't run from this family. We've fought off worse." Nathan nodded, tears mixing with the rain. The envelope slipped from his hand, soaking into the dirt. Jack picked it up, glanced at it once, then turned back toward the house. "Come on," he said, his voice low but firm. "You've got a long story to tell, and I want the truth, all of it." As they walked back toward the porch, lightning cracked across the sky, lighting up the ranch for a brief, brilliant second. Heartland stood silent and strong like it always had, but tonight, it had witnessed something new. Not betrayal, but redemption in its rawest form. The rain didn't stop until morning. It drummed softly against the barn roof, washing away the footprints and secrets the night had left behind. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of damp hay and silence. Nathan sat on a bale, his head bowed, hands clasped together like he was praying for forgiveness that hadn't yet been offered. Jack stood near the door, watching him not with anger anymore, but with a kind of quiet understanding that only comes after the storm. Nathan finally spoke. "It started months before I came here," he said, voice low and raw. "I owed people money, bad people. When I tried to walk away, they followed me. I thought if I came to Heartland, I could disappear, start over." He paused, his eyes glistening. "But they found me." "They always do." Jack didn't move. His face was unreadable, but his silence told Nathan to keep talking. "I tried to fix it on my own," Nathan continued. "I thought if I paid them off quietly, they'd leave for good. But I didn't want to drag Heartland into my mess. You all gave me a chance, something I didn't deserve." His voice broke. "I was afraid that if you knew, you'd send me away too." The words hung in the air, honest and heavy. For a long while, Jack said nothing. The only sound was the wind rattling the barn door. Then, slowly, he took off his hat and ran a hand through his silver hair. "Son," he said finally, "you made the wrong choice for the right reason. But you should have known by now around here. We don't give up on people just because they're broken." Nathan looked up, eyes wide. "You're not angry?" Jack sighed. "Angry? Maybe a little. You lied, and I can't ignore that. But I've seen men do worse trying to protect what they love. You wanted to keep us safe even if it meant carrying that weight alone. That counts for something." Nathan's shoulders shook as he wiped his eyes. "I never wanted to bring danger here. I just wanted to be useful." Jack stepped forward and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You already are. But from now on, you don't fight alone. Not at Heartland." The sun began to rise outside, cutting through the last of the clouds. Light streamed through the barn window, landing on the two men, one old and weathered, the other young and trying to rebuild. It was the kind of moment Heartland was made for. Forgiveness born from truth, and family found in the unlikeliest places. Jack turned to leave but paused at the door. "Clean yourself up," he said over his shoulder. "Amy's gonna ask questions, and I'd rather she hear the truth from both of us." Nathan nodded, a faint, hopeful smile breaking through his tears. For the first time in months, the ranch felt lighter, like the land itself had exhaled. As Jack stepped out into the golden morning, he looked across the fields and thought about how many times he'd seen this place broken, rebuilt, and reborn. Trouble always found its way to Heartland, but so did redemption. And maybe, just maybe, that was what kept it alive. Heartland had seen countless dawns, but that morning felt different, softer, calmer, almost like the land itself was grateful. The rain had washed everything clean, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and the promise of a new start. Jack stood by the corral fence, watching the horses graze as the first light stretched across the hills. For the first time in days, his shoulders were tense. The truth was finally out, and though it had shaken the ranch, it had also set it free. Nathan came out of the barn, his jacket still damp, his face tired but peaceful. He didn't hide anymore. When Amy saw him, she walked straight over, no anger, no judgment, just quiet concern. Jack watched as Nathan told her everything, his voice low but steady. Amy didn't interrupt. She just nodded slowly, her eyes full of that same unshakable compassion her mother once carried. When he finished, she placed a hand on his arm and said, "You're part of this family, Nathan. We don't turn our backs when things get hard." Jack smiled faintly at that. He didn't need to step in. Amy had said everything that mattered. Sometimes the best thing a man could do was stand back and let the next generation show the kind of heart he'd always hoped they'd have. Later that day, the ranch returned to its rhythm. Tim was back to complaining about fences, Lou was organizing another event, and the horses moved with that familiar calm that only Heartland could bring. But beneath the routine, something had shifted, a quiet reminder that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. As the sun dipped low again, Jack sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the sky painted in streaks of orange and gold. Nathan joined him, keeping a respectful distance. The silence between them no longer heavy but easy, the kind of silence that only comes after hard truths are spoken. "You did good today," Jack said finally, not looking over. "Took guts to face what you did." Nathan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't do it alone." Jack's eyes softened. No one ever does around here. The wind picked up gently, carrying the distant laughter of Amy and Georgie from the barn. The ranch, once again, was at peace. Jack leaned back in his chair, feeling the warmth of the evening settle deep in his bones.